Hello everyone, this is Dr. Watson. Thanks to Her Majestic Queen Victoria and her generous patronage of the sciences, what I have in my hands today is the miracle of modern science, the portable audio recorder, which I often use in recording my adventures along with the famed detective and my friend, Sherlock Holmes. And here is one of such recordings, edited by a great effort by a team of brilliant researchers in the city of Calcutta, which you might know is the capital of the Dominion of India. Without much ado, here it goes. It was early in April in the year 1883 that I woke up one morning to find Sherlock Holmes standing, fully dressed by the side of my bed. He was a late riser as a rule, and as the clock on the mantelpiece showed me that it was only 7:15, I blinked up at him in some surprise and perhaps a little resentment, for I myself was a late riser and would have appreciated a few more minutes of sweet sleep.
Very sorry to knock you up, Watson, but Mrs. Hudson, our dear landlady, has been knocked up and she seems quite crikey.
Oh dear, when is she not? Are we again late in our monthly payments?
That we are, Watson, but no, it seems to be a client. It seems that a young lady has arrived in a considerable state of excitement, who insists upon seeing me. She is waiting now in the sitting room. It being so early in the morning, I presume that it is something very urgent, which she has to communicate. Should it prove to be an interesting case, you would, I am sure, wish to follow it and use that weird contraption of yours which you have acquired.
Definitely, my dear fellow, I would not miss it for anything. And this contraption that you refer to is the miracle of modern science.
Yes, Watson. You have repeated the same phrase about the audio recorder a million times already. Now grab it and come on down with me.
I had no keener pleasure than in following Holmes in his professional investigations, and in admiring the rapid deductions as swift intuitions, and yet always those were founded on a logical basis, with which he unraveled the problems which were submitted to him. I rapidly threw on my clothes and was ready in a few minutes to accompany my friend down to the sitting room. And as we descended down the stairs, a lady dressed in black and heavily veiled was in the sitting room, and she was sitting near the window, and she rose as we entered.
Good morning, madam. My name is Sherlock Holmes. This is my intimate friend and associate, Dr. Watson, before whom you can speak as freely as before myself. Ha! I am glad to see that Mrs. Hudson has had the good sense to light the fire. Please draw up to it, and I shall order you a cup of hot coffee, for I observe that you are shivering.
It is not cold which makes me shiver.
What then?
It is fear, Mr. Holmes. It is terror.
She raised her veil as she spoke, and we could see that she was indeed in a pitiable state of agitation. Her face, all drawn and grey with restless, frightened eyes, like those of some hunted animal. Her features and figures were those of a woman of 30, but her hair was shot with a premature grey, and her expression was weary and haggard. Sherlock Holmes ran her over with one of his quick, all-comprehensive glances.
You must not fear. We shall soon set matters right, I have no doubt. You have come in by train this morning, I see?
Oh, how do you know about that? Did you see me?
No, but I observed the second half of a return ticket in the palm of your left glove. You must have started early, and yet you had a good drive in a dog cart, along heavy roads, before you reached the station.
The lady stared in bewilderment and surprise at my companion.
There is no mystery, my dear madam. The left arm of your jacket is spattered with mud in no less than 7 places. The marks are perfectly fresh. There is no vehicle save a dog cart which throws up mud in that way, and then only when you sit on the left-hand side of the driver.
Whatever your reasons may be, you are perfectly correct. I started from home before 6, reached Leatherhead at 20 past, and came in by the first train to Waterloo. Sir, I can stand this train no longer. I shall go mad if it continues. I have no one to turn to, none. I have heard of you, Mr. Holmes. I have heard of you from many of my lady friends whom you helped in the hour of their sore need. It was from her that I had your address. Oh, sir, do you not think that you could help me too, and at least throw a little light through the dense darkness which surrounds me?
I can only say, madam, that I shall be happy to devote the same care to your case as I did to that of your friends. As to reward, my profession is its own reward, but you are at liberty to dispense whatever expenses I may be put to at the time which suits you best. And now I beg that you tell us your story from the beginning, without leaving anything of detail.
Alas, the very horror of my situation lies in the fact that my fears are so vague and my suspicions depend so entirely upon small points, which might seem trivial to another, that even my own fiancé dismisses it as the fantasies of a nervous woman. He does not say so, but I can read in his eyes. But I have heard, Mr. Holmes, that you can see deeply into the wickedness of the human heart. You may advise me how to walk amid the dangers which encompass me.
I am all attention, madam.
My name is Helen Stoner, and I am living with my stepfather, who is the last survivor of one of the oldest Saxon families in England, the Roylotts of Stockmoran, on the western border of Surrey.
I've heard the name. Do you know anything about them, Watson?
Yeah, indeed. I seem to have heard about them too. The family was at one time among the richest in England, and their estate extended over the many English provinces.
You are indeed correct. The last century, however, 4 successive descendants were quite incompetent, and a gambler led the family to ruin. Nothing was left but a few acres of ground and the 200-year-old house. The last lord dragged out his existence there, living the horrible life of an aristocratic poor. But his only son, my own stepfather, seeing that he must adapt himself, obtained a loan from a relative with which he studied for a medical degree, and he went out to Calcutta, where by his professional skill and his force of character he established a large medical practice. In a fit of anger, however, caused by some robberies which had been perpetrated in the house, he beat his native butler to death and narrowly escaped a capital sentence. As it was, he suffered a long term of imprisonment and afterwards returned to England a morose and disappointed man.
Holmes was listening with utmost attention, with his eyes closed and hands on the chin.
When Dr. Roylott was in India, he married my mother, Mrs. Stoner, the young widow of Major General Stoner of the Bengal Army. My sister Julia and I were twins, and we were only 2 years old at the time of my mother's remarriage. She had a considerable sum of money from her last marriage, not less than £1,000 a year, and this she handed down to Dr. Roylott entirely while we resided with him, with a condition that a certain annual sum of money should be allowed to each of us after our marriage. Shortly after our return to England, my mother died. She suffered a railway accident near Crewe. Dr. Roylott then abandoned his attempts to establish himself in practice in London and took us to live with him in the old ancestral house at Stockmoran. The money which my mother had left was enough for all our wants, and there seemed to be no obstacle to our happiness. But a terrible change came over our stepfather about this time. Instead of making friends and exchanging visits with our neighbors, he shut himself up in his house and seldom came out, and when he did, it was to indulge in ferocious quarrels with whoever might cross his path. Violence of temper has been hereditary in the men of the family, and in my stepfather's case, it had, I believe, been intensified. A series of disgraceful fights took place, 2 of which entered in the police court, until at last he became the terror of the village, and the people would run at his approach for he is a man of immense strength and absolutely uncontrollable in his anger.
Interesting. Please proceed.
Yes, last week he hurled the local blacksmith over a parapet into a stream, and it was only by paying over all the money which I could gather together that I was able to avoid another public exposure. He had no friends at all save the wandering nomads, gypsies, whom they permitted to encamp on the few acres of bramble-covered land which represent the family estate, and would accept in return the hospitality of their tents, wandering away with them sometimes for weeks on end. He has a passion also for Indian animals, which he brought over from India, and he has at this moment a cheetah and a baboon, which wander freely over his grounds and are fed by the villagers almost as much as their master. You can imagine from what I say that my poor sister Julia and I had no great pleasure in our lives. No servant would stay with us, and for a long time we did all the work of the house. She was but 30 at the time of her death, and yet her hair had already begun to whiten, even as mine had.
I am incredibly sorry about her death. How did it happen?
She died just 2 years ago, and it is of her death that I wish to speak to you. You can understand that, living the life which I have described, we were little likely to date anyone of our own age and position. We had, however, an aunt, my mother's maiden sister, who lives in a nearby city, and we were occasionally allowed to pay short visits at her house. Julia went there at Christmas 2 years ago and met there a sailor to whom she became engaged. My stepfather learned of the engagement when my sister returned and offered no objection to the marriage. But within a fortnight of the day which had been fixed for the wedding, that terrible event occurred which has deprived me of my only friend.
Sherlock Holmes had been listening intently with his eyes closed and his head sunk in a cushion, but he half opened his lids now and glanced across at the visitor.
Please be precise as to details.
Indeed, every event of that dreadful time is seared into my memory. The manor house is, as I have already said, very old, and only one wing is now inhabited. The bedrooms in this wing are on the ground floor, the sitting rooms being in the central block of the buildings. Of these bedrooms, the first is my stepfather's, the second my sister's, and the third my own. There is no communication between them, but they all open out into the same corridor. Do I make myself clear?
Perfectly so.
The windows of the 3 rooms open out upon the lawn. That fatal night, Dr. Roylott had gone to his room early, though we knew that he had not retired rest, for my sister was troubled by the smell of the strong Indian cigars which it was his custom to smoke. She left her room, therefore, and came into mine, where she sat for some time, chatting about her approaching wedding. At 11 o'clock, she rose to leave me, but she paused at the door and looked back.
Tell me, Helen, have you ever heard anyone whistle in the dead of the night?
No.
I suppose that you could not possibly whistle yourself in your sleep.
I doubt it, unless you have a habit of snoring. But why do you say so?
Oh, Helen, during the last few nights, I have always, about 3 in the morning, heard a low, clear whistle. I am a light sleeper, and it has awakened me. I cannot tell where it came from, perhaps from the next room, perhaps from the lawn. I thought I would just ask you whether you had heard it.
No, I have not. It must be those wretched gypsies in the plantation.
Maybe, but I wonder why you did not hear it.
I sleep more heavily than you.
Well, it's of no great consequence then. Good night, Helen.
She smiled back at me, closed my door, and a few moments later, I heard her key turn in the lock.
Indeed. Was it your custom always to lock yourselves in at night?
I think that I mentioned to you that the doctor kept a cheetah and a baboon. We had no feeling of security unless our doors were locked.
I understand. Please proceed with your statement.
I could not sleep that night. I felt a vague feeling of impending doom. It was a wild night. The wind was howling outside and the rain was beating and splashing against the windows. Suddenly, amid all the uproar of the gale, I heard a wild scream of a terrified woman. I knew that it was my sister's voice.